our headline story, Kenya's Finance Bill 2021. Amid mounting pressure from the International Monetary Fund to East African countries to increase revenue collection, Kenya's Finance Bill 2021 has proposed to remove the requirement for the National Treasury and Planning to table any VAT regulations to Parliament for approval. This means the National Treasury would be able and be at liberty to implement new VAT legislation without going through the National Assembly for approval. What are the possible ramifications of this? What else is in the bill? Let's see if we can get some answers to these questions and more. I'm Tolulop Adeleru-Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Now, Kenya's Finance Bill of 2021 was introduced for a first reading in the National Assembly on May the 5th. It proposes removing the requirement for the Cabinet Secretary, National Treasury and Planning to table any value-added tax regulations to Parliament for approval. Now, according to experts, if this proposal is passed into law, then the National Treasury will be able to come up with new tax measures and implement them without any oversight from the National Assembly. Apart from Kenya, all other East African community countries have pegged the value-added tax at 18%, and pressure is also mounting from the International Monetary Fund for the Treasury to increase the value-added tax so as to boost tax revenue collection. Another contentious proposal in the Finance Bill 2021 that is likely to elicit sharp public anger is to charge VAT on bread, an essential item on the table of many households. This move would increase the price of this product, which is a staple food for the ordinary Kenyan. The bill also proposes including more goods and services in the excise duty regime, such as locally manufactured sugar confectionaries and white chocolate, and also reintroducing excise duty on betting at an average of 20% of the amount wagered or staked. So there's a lot in this bill that we're going to get into, and joining me is researcher and economist Mtwalo Msoni, who is a regular here with us on Business Edge. Mtwalo, welcome once again. Thank you so much for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine. Great to be back on Business Edge.
All right. So we can see the conversation around tax is obviously heating up in Kenya. It's heating up also, as we know, across the continent right now. Kenya says they're hoping to raise about $45 million in revenue before the second half of 2021. But before we get into the proposals in this bill, let's look at one of the moves that Kenya has made in recent times. Now, Kenya finally implemented the digital services tax. According to the Finance Act, income from a digital marketplace includes income accrued in or derived from Kenya. Now, a digital marketplace, according to the Act, is defined as a platform that enables direct interactions between buyers and sellers of goods and services through electronic means. So since Kenya began the implementation of this digital services tax, what's been the effect so far?
Well, I think there's a lot that still needs to be done with regards to the digital services tax. First of all, I think we've only been seeing over the past months more and more information with regards to the regulation of the digital service tax. But of course, it is quite a progressive move to try to tap into the money that big digital companies are making because business is shifting online. And in the absence of a global solution to tax the digital economy, a digital service tax is a timely unilateral measure. The only thing that we would say is a problem with Kenya's digital service tax is that it's structured in such a way that it does not have lower limits as to who will be taxed and upper limits as to the revenue thresholds for which the tax will be levied on. So far, we've seen statements from different big media agencies notifying their customers that in one way or another, they will be paying some form of tax. Some have even gone further to also mention that value-added tax need to be paid on different digital services, Google, Alphabet, Facebook, among others that are now even providing within their platform provisions for paying of the VAT in addition to the digital service tax that they'll be liable to pay.
And it is interesting. While it is something that has been recently implemented, we might need a few more months to see how it plays out. We can point to countries like Uganda that implemented something similar and see what happened there. Unfortunately, it was a negative drive. It actually drove people off of social media, off of the internet in Uganda. So we'll give this a few more months to see what develops. So let's go to this Finance Bill 2021. So the bill is quite intentional in how it aims to raise revenue for the Treasury. Now, right now, Kenya's taxation system covers income tax, VAT, customs, and excise duty. When it comes to getting taxes paid, what is the situation of things for Kenya? Is every Kenyan that is taxable actually paying tax?
We had seen statements in the past 2 weeks from the Kenya Revenue Authority saying that they would be deregistering about 60,000 Kenya taxpayer identification number holders because they are not filing returns. So with regards to optimizing the potential of the revenue that's collected, we can make a simple conclusion that not everyone who's registered for tax, probably driving some form of income, some form of revenue, is actually being taxed. So lots has to be done in form of administration. There's been some positive things that have been done by the Kenyan Revenue Authority in recent times. A good example is they now have a platform where a whistleblower can give information with regards to tax fraud or tax non-payment by some people, and this will be treated anonymously, and the Revenue Authority can conduct a targeted investigation. Moves such as this one would probably ensure that more and more revenue is being collected from potential sectors where revenue is being collected. But right now, I think the hottest debate should be around the issue of removing the function of parliament, oversight function of parliament around VAT payments, probably because there has been a little bit of under collection in VAT, and this is very understandable because during coronavirus time, we saw the Kenyan government reduce the VAT from 16% to 14% as a way to caution the increase in essential prices of goods and services and the little income that was in circulation because of the effects of the coronavirus and its impact on the tourism sector, air sector, among other sectors that Kenya is really dependent on.
All right, so let's get into that now. So the Treasury is proposing in Kenya that they be solely responsible, along with some other people outside of the National Assembly, for deciding how much value-added tax is paid and when this is actually raised. So currently, you have the Kenya Revenue Authority that has different sections that deal with taxes, while also having the authority to undertake reviews on various companies and corporations. So they, in line with the Treasury, with Cabinet Secretary, with planning, put everything together, present it to the National Assembly in terms of conversations around when taxes need to be raised and how much tax needs to be paid by different segments of Kenya's economy or Kenya's socioeconomic strata. Now, from a taxation standpoint, or even any standpoint, does this lack of oversight, regulatory oversight, in terms of when a value-added tax can be increased and what the legislation or the regulation around it is, does it make sense to remove that oversight?
Well, one fact is that it would reduce the legitimacy of a tax change. The reason that people vote for members of parliament to represent them in parliament is so that they can be able to represent the views of the ordinary people, the views of the taxpayers in terms of what resources, public resources are to be spent on and where the public resources are to be gained. Domestic resource mobilization is essential to funding public services. Citizens need to have a say on domestic resource mobilization. So Parliament needs to play a role in the deciding of whatever tax rates because they can speak up for the citizens and talk about a tax being regressive or progressive. VAT by structure is regressive in the sense that it is not sensitive of the different income levels, different wealth levels of individuals in society. It's not sensitive of the different gender standpoints of individuals in society. It increases the income, the consumption basket of the poorest and the richest in the same way. It's very regressive, and for increases in VAT, of course, you need to have people play that oversight role to basically argue for the population as to why an increase in the rate or reduction of the rate will be useful or not useful.
Why do you think this is coming now? Where is it coming from? This idea that the National Treasury is trying to put forward to the same people that it wants to remove oversights. As of right now, it still has to go to them for them to be able to agree to this. But where do you think this idea is coming from?
It might be coming from the fact that over the past year, of course, we've seen some VAT changes from 14% back to 16%, of course, because of the COVID times. We might be coming from the fact that there is some pressure from the Kenyan government to seek to raise more revenues to fund its 3.6 trillion budget. And of course, one thing that we'll be looking at is all East African countries have a VAT at 18%. We have one at 16%. This is the low-hanging fruit. It's basically an easy tax instrument to collect because it's falling on the consumer, and we already have a system in place to collect VAT. So it might be coming from that, and because there is obviously going to be opposition because of its effects on the consumption basket, its effects on the poor, this might have been what led to a decision to try to see if this can be done without having Parliament have a say, without having people have a say.
Okay, we'll see how that plays out. So we have to talk about bread. We're also going to talk about betting and also locally manufactured confectionaries as well. There's a lot more to this conversation, but at the end, we want to find out if there is a compromise. Governments need to raise revenue. Citizens have to pay tax. But in a year after a COVID pandemic, with households hit hard and income down, is there a compromise to be found in Kenya? This is Business Edge. Stay with us. Still with me on Business Edge is researcher and economist Mtwalo Msoni. And of course, we're looking at Kenya's Finance Bill 2021. We've looked at the proposal to remove regulatory oversight from the Parliament and leave the National Treasury and a few others with the decisions on how and when VAT can be raised or changed. Another contentious issue is the proposed VAT on bread. Now, we've seen that the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted government's ability to meet its expenditure requirements amid pressure for additional resources to service the current debt load. But bread is such an important staple for the Kenyan on the streets, even for the African across the continent. And we've seen how some countries have reacted when bread prices have gone up. So, Mtwalo, when you look at this and you're hearing a proposal to raise VAT on bread, one of the most I guess we'd say easiest things for many, many citizens and residents of any African country to just held on to as something to eat in a day. What do you think? Do you think this will sail through? You spoke earlier about having members in parliament who speak for the people, who make decisions in the best interest of the people. In whose interest is raising VAT on bread?
Well, you see, I think generally, when we look at tax on essential goods and services, lots of studies have shown, lots of practices with countries have shown that when you increase a VAT on essential goods and services, you're literally pushing people into poverty, pushing people in a position where they cannot afford an essential good or service. VAT on bread in most countries is zero rated because it's an important part of the food, and it's one of the things that needs to be kept affordable to let people actually afford to have a decent meal. So if you're going to increase VAT on bread, I think there'll be lots of pressure from citizens that will come with the increase in the basic food basket. Of course, this has lots of ripple effects considering that bread is such an essential food commodity to the ordinary person's food basket. It's very regressive, and unfortunately, if oversight is going to be lifted, this might go through. But we've seen in many countries that citizens rise up and oppose such increases because of their effects on the consumption basket of the ordinary person.
And I think that's an important point you made. Right now, it's being proposed in front of Parliament, but if Parliament is to agree to remove their oversight function on the National Treasury can still then raise this VAT regardless. So I think that's an important point that we need to keep in our minds. So the bill also proposes that it should include more goods and services in the excise duty regime, such as locally manufactured sugar confectionaries and even white chocolate. Is this as vital, as essential as bread? What could be the likely consequence of this?
Well, these goods and services are not as vital and as essential as bread. I think bread has very little substitutes, and some of these goods can be considered luxury goods because we can do without consuming them. But nevertheless, basically an increase in VAT, in excise duty, in customs duty is usually regressive and affects the people who are less well-to-do, the people with little income. I don't know why there's so much focus with regressive taxes. Maybe it's because they're easy to collect, but I think much of the focus needs to be put on things like income taxes, corporate income taxes, trying to do away with harmful tax incentives that are provided, which erode the tax base and will generate more revenue, trying to do with renegotiating double tax agreements, like the one with Mauritius, which is being negotiated. So many other tax agreements need to be negotiated. Having your tax increases basically solely on consumption will basically increase the cost of living for an ordinary Kenyan. And we do know that during this time, there are very little firms, very little companies that are looking at increasing the wages of their workers to beat the inflation rate. So I would predict a higher inflation rate coming with all these taxes that are being issued on the consumption of goods and services.
And I think one service, I don't know if we would call that betting a service as it may be, is also the betting aspect. And Kenya has made a lot of money from betting, but then we've seen this proposal now, reintroduction of excise duty. We also saw movements from some betting companies in recent times leaving Kenya because of some other regulatory issues. So would the revenue that comes from this excise duty, would it outweigh the corporate taxes, the license fees, the attendant revenue that the country makes from these companies? Is it a matter of scaling what makes more money for Kenya in the long run, or what is it about when it comes particularly to this betting issue?
Of course, we do know that the country is in need of resources. Someone needs to pay for these resources. Betting is something that has been seen to be booming, lucrative, generating lots of revenue. But I think the key is around the thresholds for amounts. If you can have lower thresholds that are exempt from this tax, higher thresholds that have a higher rate of this tax, then you'd be doing justice to both the consumers of betting products and the betting companies. The betting companies will remain in business if they are not making as much revenue because they'll not be liable to the tax. If they're making lots of revenue, they'll be liable to a higher tax. The problem with such progressive taxes is that most of the time they're seen as hard to implement, as one that is issued on a flat rate. But we should be worried that even if it's hard to implement, this is likely to have, in the long run, better revenue effects because higher profitable companies will pay more, the lower profitable will actually pay less. And in the end, you still keep people in the businesses regardless of the tax that you have.
All right, so earlier on, I did mention the International Monetary Fund, and we've both seen that Kenya right now is holding VAT at 16%, while neighbors in the East African community are at 18%. But we've also seen the International Monetary Fund push for African countries to increase their tax base and also then increase their revenue. But it's very, very difficult for many countries to do this. Why do you think this push is coming from the IMF?
Well, the IMF also wants to give loans that will be paid back. Their interest, of course, is to have the loan paid back. And before giving the loan, they usually impose conditionalities, or in this case, they call it advice to countries in terms of how they can ensure that in the long term, they can be able to raise their own revenues. But unfortunately, some of what is proposed is blind with regards to its effect on the citizenry. So a country can get an IMF facility of a lot of resources, be restricted in spending it on things that are really beneficial to the citizens, like social protection, spend it on probably something to do with balancing up balance of payments. But in the end, to pay back the facility, they have to increase a tax like the value-added tax or other consumption taxes because they're easy to collect. So unfortunately, this is the status quo, but ideally, I think from the IMF perspective as well, while giving this advice, it's important to reflect on what effects will a loan that needs to be paid back using domestically generated revenue will have on the poorer citizens. I think from the IMF perspective, much more focus should be on trying to help countries improve their tax administrative systems to be able to cope with base eroding and profit shifting measures that are being done by some of the big companies that potentially would be able to offset some of the bills that we do talk about in terms of deficits for countries.
So very quickly, Mtwalo, in just 30 seconds, taxes are one of the sure things in life, but how much you pay, when you pay, that's a subject of debate. Kenya is coming out of a pandemic-induced economic slowdown like many other countries. Is there a compromise to be found? You see a very ambitious, intentional tax drive coming from not just Kenya, but across the continent. But this is coming at a time when citizens simply just don't have much more to give. Household income is down, unemployment numbers are up, people have lost jobs, and we're all still struggling. What's the compromise? 30 seconds.
Well, so the compromise is to tax the rich, tax the profitable, leave the ones who are not profitable, leave the poor untaxed. It's as simple as that. Tax the rich, tax the profitable. Don't increase your tax base so you can tax the poor, push them into deeper poverty, let them not afford bread, let them not afford the staple food, let them not afford a decent life, let them not afford decent transportation using the border. Like there is a tax that's been proposed on motorcycles, a growing business which is helping the transport sector. To tax the rich, you need administrative capacity. Improve your administrative capacity. Focus your resources on improving administrative capacity, having cost audits, having audits for big firms which are engaged in suspected harmful practices. I think it's that simple.
All right, Mtwalo Msoni, thank you as always for joining me on Business Edge. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
And we have NC4 to watch as we wrap up today's show. We start in Nigeria, where inflation rate now stands at 18.12% for April 2021, indicating the first drop in headline inflation in about 20 months. Moving from there, the first berth of the long-awaited Lamu port is set to be launched and commence operations on Wednesday, May 20th. Lamu Port is a flagship project in the Lamu Port, South Sudan and Ethiopia transport corridor, which links Kenya, South Sudan, and Ethiopia. Number 3 on our list, South Africa's low economic growth and rising debt burden could see socioeconomic tension intensify and impede policy reforms. This is according to ratings firm Moody's, which released a research note on Tuesday. And finally on our list, remittances from Ugandan workers in the diaspora fell by $300 million in 2020. And this is from the World Bank. Now, details which are contained in the World Bank Global Knowledge Partnership on Migration and Development indicates that remittances during the period declined to 1.1 billion from 1.4 billion in 2019. And that's it on this edition of Business Edge. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can head to our website and also download our mobile app on Play Store and the App Store. Until next time, I'm Tolulop Adeleru-Balogun.